progress.
Welcome, everybody. Let's just kind of recap because of the disruptions. As I'm sure those of you who were in the class, the Zoom class on Monday, noticed things went astray with all the technical glitches. So what I'm going to do is cap isn't the right word, re-give the lecture. Oh yeah. The email link is broken. Oh, wow. Now that's a new one, although maybe there was something like that on Monday. Thank you, whoever just mentioned that. When you say broken, how does that affect it at your end? Because I sent the link the same way I've always done it for 2.5 years, and it almost always works.
The URL was posted twice without a space in between it. And so it tried to go to a website that was the link twice, which does not exist.
That sounds like an internal Zoom issue. That concerns me. Oh, that's happened.
No, it
Did
was
that
in
happen? Can you tell me? Thank
It
you.
was in the
Did
text
that
of the
happen
email.
on Monday? The same thing you just described it. There was a problem Monday too, but I thought somebody said that was different. One of the students who was able to relog. The reason I'm restating the lecture notes or giving that portion, just the first 25, 30 minutes that didn't get recorded for whatever reason, is because less than half of the people on the Zoom class before we were booted out, all of us from Zoom, less than half were able to return. And that, I think, was partly due to a similar problem. I don't want to spend a long time on this, but it isn't unimportant. So I'm glad you brought it up. I'm just trying to figure out if that's going to be happening. I guess I'll talk to the tech people directly. You know, you have to send them an email and it takes them a day to get back to you, but before our next class on Monday, because that's a big problem.
Do you type out the email to invite us all to the Zoom call?
Mm-hmm. I could do another thing, which I did used to. The first semester I was doing Zoom, I just wrote I sent you an email with the actual, just the, Zoom link number, the 11-digit number. And that by itself is all I used to do, and students usually had no problem. The trouble with that is once in a blue moon, I'd get, maybe I'm slightly dyslexic, I'd get one digit wrong. But it's better than not trying, in other words, I'll try to do both. If you hear what I'm saying, I will still copy the link, but I will also send an email right after that. That's my best guess as to what I can do. Because if this happens again, that's really beyond minor. That's a significant problem. I'll also check with the tech services and see if they've had any issues with that. Okay, I need to let everyone in here. Well, at least we're getting people now who somehow were able to get the link. I mean, I look at it before I hit send to make sure the number is correct. I did notice a bunch of letters before it. I just assumed that was just part of the Zoom process. I don't know why it would do that, because all I did was hit copy link like I always do, in the upper right corner. All instructors do it that way. We have to send
it looks like when you did copy link, you pasted it twice into the email, one after the other.
Oh, that could explain it. Thank you. Yeah, it's possible, because the first time I hit paste, it didn't appear on my screen. You know how touchy, various keys and keyboards can be, although that hasn't ever happened. Well, could have, that I didn't know about. So I will do both things. I guess we'll see how it goes. On Monday, what I'll do is send first the link, careful and double check that it's, before I hit send, that it's just a single copy link. And then I will also send the number itself, so people could just enter it. It works both ways, I know, because I've done it with my own family and with other teachers. So hopefully they'll solve the problem, but I'll also check with tech. Anyway, we should move forward because we have a couple of topics. Before we get to the slide, let's see, here we go. Yeah, thank you. Here's what we have, let's see. Yeah, see here, I hit those two people twice. The first time it didn't let them in. The same way I always hit the keys on my keyboard. Sometimes you have to hit harder, but if you do that, it'll do it twice and whatever. So I will, do what I just said. In other words, I will send you two routes to get to Zoom class on Monday. And if that works, that's what I'll do for the rest of the semester. Okay, but this is really important for everybody, and it is recording now. I double checked. So what we have here is my own hand printed, and I know it's low tech, but it's really, you know, I've been told I print neatly enough that no one ever seems to have trouble reading my handwriting. And it's not handwriting, it's printing. This is the way you should label your papers when you send them in 1 week from today. You still have, you know, several days to finish writing them. And of course, you can forward to me a sample or even a semi-final draft for me to give you feedback, but don't wait till the day before it's due if you want me to get back to you. So anyway, what you should do, of course, is label it this way: Art 1.2 research paper, and then underline last name, period, first name. That way, please make sure you do also, I'll send you an email as well and say this again, and this will be posted so you have multiple ways to remind you. If you send it in a different format or with different labeling, it might go astray and I might not get it or get it in time to log it in as not being late. And so we want to avoid that. This has worked quite well for now. It's going on 5 semesters since we all started doing a lot of Zoom classes at the JC. And please send it if you want a quick, you know, confirmation, ask for that. Otherwise, you can assume it went through unless you hear otherwise from me. But if you want a confirmation, you should put that, you know, in the email below, you know, your name and everything before, or, you know, with this file. The file, it has to be PDF. Please don't send me any other format. I can't open them, and it's not my policy in any case. This is the district's policy that all assignments need to be sent as PDFs because it's the most universally openable, of course, of all formats. So please do it that way too. If you want to be certain it gets to me, it's much quicker and more efficient for me to navigate. The Outlook is just such a cumbersome system. Anyway, the point is you can send it either or both. But if you really want to be sure it's going to get through, and especially if you want me to confirm that I got it, please send it to markw@aol.com. Remember, I do not use Canvas. I've said that like 4 or 5 times. This system has worked fine because then I and my readers can access those and no one else sees them besides, you know, the individuals appropriate. And like I said, I'm going to grade at least 1 out of each or half, in other words, roughly of each student's submitted assignments, alternating with those that are graded by readers, but I don't just blindly enter the grade the reader put into their response, you know, and when they get it to me, I double check it first to see if there was any errors. There usually aren't, but there could be of, you know, adding up the total points or what have you. Then I forward it to you with the cover sheet. You have to include the cover sheet. Yes, I'm sending it. I already sent you guys an email about that, but I will do it again. Over the weekend, you'll have the cover sheet days before it's due, because again, it's not due until midnight on Wednesday, the 21st, your research paper. So you've still got time to work on it. You should already be working on it. Hopefully you're not just now picking a topic and researching it and maybe at least starting to write it. And any questions you can send to me by email, of course, as long as you give me at least 48 hours before the deadline. Okay, that's the first order of business. Any questions at all now about the papers? You know, you can pick any topic. I think some people are still unclear. It doesn't have to do with the syllabus or the periods and the various types of art that we're covering in this class. It can be ancient art. It can be modern art. It can be an artist you know personally. The only limit, it can't be your own artwork. That'd be too much of an inside job. You'd obviously not have to research the meaning on that one. So only your own personal artwork is the only prohibited topics for you to choose. So pick, if you haven't already, just pick a work of art very quickly that you care about, that you're interested in, that you want to, you know, research and write about. I have already sent the requirements and we've discussed them in class, but of course, if there's any questions, as I've been saying, at any point, that's what we're here for. And I'll stick around like always at the end of the lecture today to answer any remaining questions. Okay, it looks like we have at least a quorum, slightly over half of the total room. And I'm sure some of you, if you were here on Wednesday and you got back into the second meeting, you will have heard these, but I'm not going to gloss over or rush through them. However, we're going to get to some new slides, so don't just log out, because there's a possibility that one of the slides we didn't get to in the second half of Monday's lecture. By the way, I posted the first half already on Amazon. I decided to just go ahead and get that out there. And all we got through, in case you weren't here on Monday, was the first two before we got booted out of Zoom, or I did. Well, everyone did, and that was Gentileschi, right? Judith and the Maidservant. So that's already on my YouTube channel. And the other one was Rubens, The Garden of Love. Okay, so let's resume where we were just before we got cut out. And I know some of you have seen this, but it's actually, in a way, more relevant now to mention some of the background facts about this slide, because here we go, the title, 2 words, the name of the king. It's a portrait of the King of England, Charles I. We know now there's someone called Charles III who just took over from his recently deceased mother, Queen Elizabeth. So this is Charles I. Remember, that's usually Roman numeral, right? 1. Charles I, title, artist, it's just 2 words, his last name, Van, V-A-N, and then Dyck, D-Y-C-K, 1635. So let's just say a couple of quick things about who he was. He was one of the most famous and most successful of all portrait painters in Europe during his lifetime. His lifetime spanned the early 1600s. Well, that's the date you see here is 1635. So during the first half of the 17th century, I think by now everybody knows the 1600s is the 17th century, there was a philosophy that many kings in Europe adhered to, let's just say, or believed in, and that was called, there are 2 ways to describe it, and so either one will do in your notes. The divine right of kings, that pretty much says it in a phrase, it's a sentence. The divine right of kings, or the other one-word way of describing it with a capital A, absolutism. Either way of defining, or sorry, of titling this concept, it means that kings, many kings, including this guy here, Charles I, throughout Western Europe, or all of Europe really, not just Western, so throughout Europe in the 1600s, believed that the kings, those kings believed they should have absolute power and no one should question them or interfere with their right to do whatever they want. Well, that isn't something that most people in England by this time agreed with. They already had a parliament, right? And they were allowed to at least have very limited, but some elected representation. So when this guy, here's the main facts about this, who he was, the subject, Charles I, he was a king who believed in the divine right of kings. So he disbanded parliament, actually sent soldiers to force them, chase them out of parliament. That never happened before or since. And so those very angry members of parliament went home and organized a rebellion. It was called the English Civil War. You don't have to know that term, but that's the historical term. It was really more of a revolution to overthrow this king because he had done something that obviously violated what they felt were their rights to some limited democracy. So there were 2 armies. They fought for years during this period we call the English Civil War, and he lost. So you think that at the end of it? Nope. He refused to accept the offer to go peacefully to France with all his worldly belongings and his family and his staff. He could have survived and he wouldn't do it. He raised another army a second time. In other words, he fought the Parliament's army and lost again. And then he was tried for treason and beheaded. That's a major point, turning point in world history, especially in English history, because no other country with a king, no monarchy had ever had a popular rebellion, overthrow a king, then try him, convict him, and execute him. That was a radical move. So this king ended up, in other words, because of his arrogance, and you can see it in this portrait. So the other part or last fact about the meaning is, what does this portrait say about this king? Well, that's where Van Dyck's philosophy comes in. He was the court painter for this king, meaning he actually lived in one of their palaces. I'm not sure which. Buckingham Palace didn't exist then. So one of the king's palaces, he lived there, rent-free, and anytime the king wanted, he would be summoned to paint a portrait of either the king like this one, just of himself and his servants, with his horse, obviously, or his family, whatever the king wanted. That was his job. Van Dyck was supposed to paint it. Okay, but here he's giving us a hint of the personality, and he's being critical. In fact, I would say even sarcastic about the arrogance of Charles I, who obviously was arrogant. From what I just told you, you can tell he didn't understand that he couldn't just do whatever he wanted and people would roll over and play dead. Not in England anyway, they refused to. It cost him his life, his throne, and his wealth. So here he is. Look at his face. Look at the expression. You can see the arrogance. That is not a minor detail. It's an important part of the meaning, where the painter is making a statement. The king was so egotistical, he didn't get that. He didn't understand that this portrait was being critical of him as an arrogant, overbearing, egotistical ruler who thought he had no bounds or no one could tell him anything. And this is just a few years before that rebellion happened. And even his pose, look at his body language. It's a part of the meaning of the painting, is that Van Dyck did that with most of his subjects. He would hint at their inner character or personality through some details, whether it's their expression, in this case both, or the body language. I mean, look how he's standing. Even the way his legs, are like he's strutting, standing still. But if that's not enough, the humorous or sarcastic aspect comes in, and these two footmen, that's the right word, they're servants, and they are not allowed to even look in his direction, let alone directly at him. Look at that. They're looking away from him, even though they're there to help him. And even his horse, that's the part that makes me smile. I've seen this portrait. I think it's in the British Museum, the National Gallery. It's in England. The horse, his favorite horse that he probably rode all the time, even his horse is looking down like, oh, I can't look at my master. Even, indirectly, I must look away. All of that adds up to making a statement that this man caused his own death. Well, no one knew he was going to die yet, but he caused his own, loss of power and loss of the throne. And some people in England already, by the time of this painting, predicted he would, completely lose everything because of his arrogance. All right, that's plenty on the meaning. Formal analysis. Balanced, I would say so, because the way the tree branches and leaves sort of mimic the foreground, I would say it's roughly balanced top to bottom. But there are people who think, because the sky covers most of the far left, that it's unbalanced toward the right. So I wouldn't argue with that. And then the largest object, what's the king? Then his horse. And then I guess you could argue the tree, that we only see the top part of it behind them. And then it depends on what you want to think of the next. Maybe the footpath that they're standing on. Here it's all the techniques for space. You've got atmospheric perspective, right? And here there is a vanishing point somewhere behind that tree on the horizon. Of course, obviously overlapping and foreshortening on the path, especially in his shoulders, diminishing size of the footmen as they get further away. The only thing missing is register line. All the lines are thin outlines here. I don't really see any bold outlines. And the cement texture, it's Baroque. And remember, Baroque is still the realistic period of realism in painting, in Europe at least. So everything is super sharp, like the satin jacket he's wearing, and the leather breeches, and his fancy hat, and the hair, the skin, the clothing, even the horse's body. It's all super sharp, realistic cement texture, and again, strong and realistic modeling. Mostly stable. Look at the horse's head. It's really more upright than anything, and then the rest of his body is horizontal. This footman's leaning over a bit. The top of the tree branches are, but he, the king, is standing upright. So it's a little bit of dynamic detail, but more stable and dynamic. The rhythm's obvious with repeated arms, hands, legs, and there's no kind of abnormal or distorted proportion or scale. Everything's realistic in both the body parts within each figure and between the figures. Okay, the next must know we're going to go to is La Bohemienne. Some of you may know the play, and they made a pretty decent movie of it called Rent. And there's a song in there with this title. I think it's La Vie, the Bohemian life. The word means the same thing it did 400 years ago. I'll spell that, 2 words. L-A, first word La, L-A, and then Bohemian is capital B-O-H-E-M-I-E-N-N-E. La Bohemienne. The artist's name is Halls, and the date is 1636. Now, first, I always like to start off, who was Halls? Halls was one of the other you could just say most successful portrait painters in Europe during his lifetime. He lived in the same time frame as Van Dyck. In fact, they knew each other. They were both from Holland. At least they met. I mean, they respect each other. And so he made his living painting, you could guess, people who paid well. But that's not all he did. If that's all he did, we probably wouldn't even be talking about him. What he did that makes him different than most portrait painters or successful, and they were famous, they were known outside of Holland, these people. Well, Van Dyck was hired from Holland to cross the channel, go to England to live with the king's family. Whereas Hall stayed in Holland most of his career, but his paintings were known throughout Europe. So if this was not obvious now, you're going to see, before we describe who is this woman and the title, what that means, let's say a little more about the artist Halls. Here's, I think, the most important fact about him, and therefore for your notes on the meaning of the must-know La Bohemian. Halls was one of those rare painters, along with Rembrandt's the other one that you're going to see after this, who didn't only focus on rich patrons or powerful people to paint portraits. He also chose to paint portraits of people from the lower class, the dispossessed, society's rejects, and or you could say, oppressed. Any of those words will do. He empathized with them. And so when he chose, for instance, this portrait is of a homeless veteran, at least most historians believe. We don't know exactly everything about the man he's painted here, because this man was not a famous entertainer. He had once fought for his country. The title is, it's not the must know, the title of this is The Jolly Trooper, but it's a misleading title deliberately. Because what happened is, after wars, that people had no choice. They were drafted, and all over Europe, this was true, and most of the world too. China certainly, and the Aztec and Mayan empires, you had no choice. The government says you're going to go fight in a war, you fight. Like what you see happening now in Russia, right? So this guy had been forced to fight for his country and got no help when he came home, and became either homeless or poor or homeless. So in order to support himself, he had to entertain people with money in various bars and cafes by playing. It's not really a guitar. You can just say a musical instrument, guitar-like. I think it's a mandolin. Anyway, he was playing a musical instrument and making up songs and poems and stories to entertain people, to, in essence, begging for money, but doing it his own way, not just asking for handout, but actually creating all kinds of entertaining performances. And that's why Halls painted him, to show him as a person with a sense of self-worth and maintained his own dignity despite being poor and having gotten, there was no veterans administrations and no help for former veterans. They were on their own, as we see many of veterans today are homeless. At least there is some kind of a government agency to help in most countries, former veterans, but there wasn't any back then. So he respected and even admired these people. So he would paint them sometimes just for his own, to make his own statement, and even pay them to enough to maybe live a month or something, pay them something to pose for him. So that's what this is. This is the must know now. So you want to take the specific notes. Who is this? Well, La Bohemienne is someone who lives the alternative, today you might even say underground lifestyle or alternative lifestyle. In that era, it would almost certainly mean, we don't know exactly who this woman is, but there's been some research that he would have met her like he did many Halls, the artist, many other, dispossessed people or oppressed or disadvantaged people, poor and often homeless, in some of these bars and nightclubs, and decide to paint them to show that they still had a sense of dignity and self-worth. This woman is almost certainly in some way abused. It could be domestic abuse, or it even could be, here we go, good timing, here we go. Yeah, we're just talking about Rand's Halls here. Now, I hope that worked. The La Bohemian. So she was almost certainly the victim of abuse, or of, it could have been physical, sexual, it could have been an abusive relationship or dysfunctional family. or some other kind of, horrible fate, that she decided not to just, accept, but move off on her own. So she is supporting herself probably as a waitress or server in some kind of an inn. And that's where most historians think Halls saw her and decided to paint her. And look at her face. Look at the sense of her own self-worth he's capturing in her expression, and especially in her eyes. It's a minor masterpiece, but he did a lot of paintings like this. Again, that marks him as very different, almost unique, but you got to say that in this regard, he and Rembrandt they were friends. They knew each other. Halls was more successful during his lifetime and earned more money than Rembrandt. I'll explain that when we get to the Rembrandt slide or two of his must-knows. But to finish up on the meaning of this one, so what is he saying? He's saying society is not doing right by these people. They've been abused or abandoned or harmed in some way, and through no fault of their own, they become poor or homeless. And we should treat them with dignity and respect. Again, very unusual. The only other artist I've mentioned in this class, and some of you might remember, one of my favorites of all time, is Albert Dürer. 100 years earlier, he was doing it, but he did it mostly with engravings, prints and things. And his work, though it was well known, wasn't as successful or as famous as either this guy, Halls, or Rembrandt. But these paintings were done, like I said, last point on the meaning is mostly by choice by him, who would then, Halls would then approach the subject, say, I like your personality or your character or your strength or whatever, and ask if they, with of course permission, he could pay them a modest fee to pose and capture their dignity and its inner sense of self-worth. Okay, formal analysis. Wow, there's a lot to say about this, so let's just talk about the highlights. First of all, her face is fairly strong and realistic, simulated texture and strong modeling, and her face and her hair, all the way down to her neck. But from below her neck, the blouse especially, the dress and blouse, that's almost impressionistic. You could add that to one of the sentences if you want to on the meaning, because many historians who look back on the origins of Impressionism more than 200 years later, we'll get to that, of course, after the midterm, say that this man, Halls, was ahead of his time and he helped inspire Impressionism. And there's some evidence for that. I mean, it's not direct, but indirect, where some of the painters who came out of the Impressionist movement, the early ones, the pioneers of Impressionism, had seen some of Hall's portraits, like this one, especially in museums. By the 1800s, his paintings were in museums. So you could say this is very diffused or rough. You could use either word, not sharp and strong. So diffused or rough, similar texture and modeling on all of her body. I would say even on her breasts and certainly on her shoulders, well, her clothing from below her neck, whereas the neck and head and hair are realistic. There is no outline here on her clothing. There is, though, around her face, of course, but it's kind of indistinct. So I wouldn't say it's sharp or thin outline. It's implied. Again, that's a bit unusual, but other painters had done that. The background, look at this. Where is she in space? Is she indoors or outdoors in a dive bar where she might be working, or some kind of a shelter or someone's home? We don't know. We aren't supposed to know. So the only technique for space, whether two, is overlapping and foreshortening on her shoulders and arms. Of course, there's the rhythm of her eyes and her mouth, her lips, and her hair, and of course her arms and dress. The colors are cool on the background, cool on her blouse, and warm, of course, on her dress and face, and neutral on her hair. And it is both stable dynamic. I mean, she is mostly upright, but her head's tilting somewhat to the right. So is it balanced? I would say roughly, but it's up to you to decide. Left to right, I mean. Roughly balanced, I would say, but definitely unbalanced toward the bottom, of course. This is only one mass. There's no second or third largest masses. Let's see, stable, the dynamic in the tilt of her head, but I'd say overall, she's still mostly her upper body is more vertical than horizontal. So it's a bit of both. And then let's see, am I forgetting anything? Oh yeah, proportions and scale. There's no alteration here from reality. It's realistic images of those elements. And I did mention the modeling is also soft and diffused, except on her face and hair. All right, now we get to the most important artist of this week's lecture. And the reason for that is how after he died, he was well known during his lifetime, Rembrandt, of course, and we're seeing two of his slides from the syllabus. He became even more famous and more influential. And you don't have to write this, but I think it's interesting. I just almost finished a biography of Picasso. It's really well written. And it mentions how many times in his career Picasso chose to look at a Rembrandt painting or a photo of, a print of a Rembrandt painting, or go to a museum where they had them in Paris, where he lived, of course. There are a lot of Rembrandts in French, especially in French museums in Paris. So he could see them, or even go to Holland to look at them. And he would, Picasso would then paint dozens of versions of an original Rembrandt painting because he admired Rembrandt so much. That should surprise a few, but surprised me. I mean, I don't think of Picasso and Rembrandt in the same category, except they're both painters, but obviously Rembrandt inspired painters hundreds of years after he died. So here we go. The first one we're going to see is, I'll give you the title, but then how you should take your notes is about who he was and how he came to be so independent and so innovative. I would use that word with two ends, innovative and independent compared to most other portrait painters at that time. He was mostly, like most painters at that time, they made their bread and butter, their main income from portrait painting, but he went way beyond that. So the actual must know we'll get to, and I think it's 3 more slides, is two words: night watch, just like it sounds, night watch. You probably already know how to spell his name, but here it is: Rembrandt, 1642. Okay, so what can we say about Rembrandt is now what you'd be doing, taking notes. First of all, he came from a modest or lower middle class, better way to put it, lower middle class background. By this time, there was a solid middle class, an upper middle class, and of course, there's always an upper class and a lower class. He wasn't from the poorest rank, but he was not solid middle class. His father was a working man who eventually got his own small business. But he, Rembrandt, the man here, the artist, never had any formal training and could not afford a tutor or mentor, or you could just say someone to guide him. He taught himself. That's an important detail. So that's first. He didn't have any financial backing, or a patron when he was young and started out. He just accomplished everything on his own. That's pretty impressive, because obviously the decks were stacked, especially back then, against someone coming from the lower middle class who had no connections. So he moved to Amsterdam, and his skill was so obvious that he began getting commissions. And when this is the self-portraits, you don't have to write about this particular painting. When he was in his late 20s, like about 28, and I think you can see, and if it's not obvious, you don't have to write this now, because this is specifically before this portrait. He did many self-portraits. It's one of his earliest self-portraits, and look at his face, especially the way his mouth and his eyes indicate his thoughts or his inner, feelings about what himself. He was surprised by his own early success. You can tell he was successful by the feather in his cap and the gold trim on his cap and his jacket. And so he's actually surprised at his own success. And at this point, if that's all, again, we knew about him and he just kept painting rich and famous people and making plenty of money, we wouldn't probably be talking about him here. So what makes him different than most other portrait painters? Here we go. Well, one thing is he liked painting biblical, but that's not so unusual, but biblical and or historical scenes. This is called the blinding of Samson. Again, it's not the must know, but look at the blood spurting out of the blinding, one eye being, well, eventually both his eyes were gouged by supposedly Roman soldiers. These guys aren't dressed like Romans, but they're supposed to symbolize the Romans in the Bible, the scene in the Bible. His hair has been cut off or chopped off by Delilah. So this is a scene from the Bible. He did that a lot, and that was mostly for his own choice or of his own choice. He wasn't being paid to do those paintings, and some of those are some of his most famous. But what made him really unique was the change that he went through, that he literally was willing to give up, not just risk, he absolutely gave up his, you could say cushy if you want that word, but I would just say, handsome, comfortable. There we go. That's a good word. Comfortable, lifestyle or career, to say a very comfortable career, painting rich and wealthy people or groups of wealthy and powerful people. Group corporate portraits. That may sound funny to say that from 400 years ago, but yes, there were corporations already. Some of you know this. I think most historians agree the Dutch invented the stock market, for better or for worse, better and worse. In any case, there were corporations then. So what are we looking at here? This is the segue into the meaning of the next slide is the first must know. So here he was, in his 30s by the time he painted this. Some of you've seen it's pretty famous. It's called The Anatomy Lesson, and it's done around 1640. And so what we see, he was in his late 30s, and is the only real professional, a medical professional, is a doctor. He actually was a well-known doctor giving an anatomy lesson, dissecting a cadaver, right? These guys might have once upon a time been medical students, but that's not what they are now. Look at them. They're in their 40s, 50s, 60s. These guys aren't young medical students. So who are they? These were a corporate board of directors of an HMO. This is what I've said in every class. And some people will say that's overstating or simplifying the case, but not really, because it was a private for-profit hospital board of directors, and there were no public hospitals, and there was certainly no, obviously government healthcare or anything like that back then. So these people were in a for-profit hospital. They were the board of directors, where maybe 20, 30 years ago, they've been young doctors or med students, but not now. And they all asked Rembrandt to paint their faces equally well lit. That's a very important detail. You notice that? None of them look like they're in shadow or behind one of the others. They all equally emphasize, so they all have their ego stroked. That's the point of this painting. These men wanted their ego stroked. So this hung in their boardroom during their meetings, making them look like young, eager medical students. And of course, they were anything but. So here we get to the must-know. This is one of the most famous paintings in the history of art. No one would argue with that, that's ever studied this period or Rembrandt. So again, I already gave you the title, Night Watch, Rembrandt, 1642. Why is this so different? Well, let's start with the first and I think most obvious fact, marking this painting as a major departure, I would use that word, or change, whichever you prefer, for Rembrandt and for painting in general. Group portraits were the bread and butter of, obviously any successful painter, not just in Europe, but really all over the world, where, kings and rich people and powerful people would hire a painter to show their importance. And a group portrait is, of course, more money for the artist. Well, guess what happened with this? Just the opposite. Rembrandt was, in other words, tired of painting to stroke the egos of these rich patrons, like he had done with that last painting, the Anatomy Lesson. So he decided to do something different and creative, very innovative. He's showing it as these men going out. Night Watch sort of tells you, but if it's not clear who they are, they're a private security guard or force of people going out on patrol in the evening. I'm sure there was a day shift and a night shift. These are the night shift guys. They're going out, they're grabbing their weapons, their muskets or their spears, or even some of them swords, and shields, what have you. They're getting armed and ready to go out on patrol. And where are they going to patrol? There were no police. There were no public, agencies for public safety, nothing. But if you were in a wealthy neighborhood, then the neighborhood would hire, and that's what these people were, private security force to protect a well-to-do section or district of Amsterdam. They're about to go out on patrol. He's showing them as it would be probably, around, midnight, well after dark, as they were getting ready. And it's a masterpiece, because what you see here is what you actually would have. If you stood in front of these people, this is the kind of movement, activity, dynamic energy that you would see a group of these men performing. And when they saw this portrait, all of these people were going to pay him an equal amount of money. Not one of them paid him a single dime. He didn't earn a single penny from this. because they hated it. They all thought he had insulted them because, for instance, look at this guy here. His face is totally obscured by this man's arm. This guy's looking down and in shadow. Then we have this whole group is way in the background. You can't see hardly any of their faces. And even the three in front, right, are the only ones shown with some kind of emphasis on their facial features, are not emphasized as much as his previous group portraits. And then last but not least, that upset all of these men rejected the painting. They came to a studio. They waited for him to unveil it. When he pulled the curtain down, they gasped in horror. They said, "We're not paying. You didn't do what we asked," which is for us to equally emphasize each one of us, all whatever 40 or so of them. And he'd done that before, but he said he was not going to do that on this one. And the last thing about the meaning here that caused him to lose this commission, well, yeah, he lost the money, so that would qualify as the painting was just rejected. And then all of these men went out, at least the more powerful ones, the officers, and said to other clients, potential clients for future paintings that Rembrandt might have gotten, don't hire him. He's lost it. He's gone off the deep end, whatever. He stopped painting the way he used to. So don't hire Rembrandt. And his clientele, his income then dried up. That's what I mean by he was willing, I should say, to sacrifice everything. So this woman, we don't know who she is. It's a ghost. It's the spirit of his recently deceased mother. It's the wife of one of the officers. But why would one woman be sitting there in a strangely separate, lit, almost like from within? It's a bizarre and mysterious image that also upset these people. That she either wasn't there, or if she had been, somehow she was betrayed in a mystical way. So they just all rejected not only this painting, but him from then on. So he lost almost all of his future clients. Then, of course, that led to his loss of income. He lost his home and his studio. And eventually the government, the city of Amsterdam, he had to declare bankruptcy. So he lost most of his own paintings. He ended up not even being able to keep most of his own work. He managed to save maybe a couple of dozen paintings and moved out to the country. But when he came back, we'll do a formal analysis and do the next must know. And then we have two new ones that you definitely want to take notes on, and that will take us up to about 4:15. We won't go over today. Okay, so what do we have? Is it balanced? Well, obviously left to right, roughly balanced, and unbalanced toward the bottom. For space, this does have obviously the main techniques: foreshortening, diminishing size, of course, overlapping. And there is scientific perspective, but it's an interior view, so there is no atmospheric perspective. All the lines are thin outlines. Most of his paintings use thin outlines. And the simulated texture on the parts of the people you can see is strong and realistic on the hair, the clothing, the skin. And of course, so is the modeling. But it's soft and diffused in the background. And on this mysterious woman, ghost-like is the phrase I would use. We can just say strange or mysterious female figure. There, the simulated texture and the modeling is soft and diffused, and it is on the men in the background. But the ones you can see in the middle ground and the foreground, there's sharp, strong modeling and simulated textures everywhere. And then we have the colors. Well, they're kind of warm on the wall and definitely on all of their faces and hair, and alternating, of course, cool on the white uniform, neutral on this guy's black outfit, and warm, of course, on the red clothing of this musketeer here, and then the others again alternate. It is dynamic. There isn't very much of a straight line in it. You could make the case these two men are mostly stable, but look at them, they're in motion. Every figure is in motion. That's what makes this a masterpiece. By the way, it's huge. It fills an entire wall. It's in a museum in Amsterdam, and it has a separate whole section of the museum for it, including some of the studies he did for it. It's that influential a painting. It broke all those rules that corporate group paintings had ever done before him. So he broke through the barrier of just egotistical, demanding clients, and just said, you know what, I'm gonna do my own thing. You either like it or you don't. They didn't, and he nearly lost everything. Okay, am I forgetting anything, Line? The largest mass. Well, that's up to you. Is it the whole group of men? Then that'd be a large mass. If it individually, each person is a separate mass, then you'd have to say the wall would be just enough of it. You can see in the background would be the largest mass. And then I guess the guy in black, then the guy in white, and the guy in red. Yeah, okay. And the proportions and the scale are all realistic or normal. This is the second Rembrandt must know, and the title is very simple: The Jewish Bride, Rembrandt, 1665. So what do we see here is his latter period of painting, in which he, because he couldn't afford, he lost his house and most of his income and most of his future clients. He moved into the, or near, I think it was on the edge of the Jewish ghetto in Amsterdam. And many of his models that he painted, or commissions that he was hired but not paid as much as he was before, were Jewish residents of Amsterdam from the ghetto. That is the word, by the way. The word's originally a Jewish word for a neighborhood where Jews were forced to live separately. And so he obviously identified with them because he'd been rejected by the powerful and wealthy classes. And so here he's painting late middle age, or maybe you could even say elderly husband and wife who've obviously had a long, happy marriage. And it's a pretty much of a masterpiece, because look at the way their body language indicates their long, abiding love, or their deep, you can say, love they've had for each other. They're, completely selfless, you could say, towards each other. They're old enough, almost certainly, to have raised a family. Their kids would have been old enough to have moved out. So they're, on their own again after a lifetime together. And he captures that tenderness between them brilliantly, with even the way the body language of the husband leaning over towards his head, towards his wife's, and expression on her face, and his hand on her shoulder. It's a very powerful statement of deep, abiding love between a couple that have been together probably their whole adult life. He would have been paid something for this, because you can see the man is a successful businessman, but being from the Jewish ghetto, he wouldn't be very wealthy, because he wouldn't have probably been able to get, the highest levels of Dutch society, but he probably had his own business. And so, they paid him something, but nowhere near what the previous corporate client portraits would have paid him, but enough to live on. And he painted all kinds of people who were dispossessed for the rest of his career, just for his own interest, the way Hals had done that. Okay, formal analysis. Is it balanced? I would say absolutely, because even though his head, is higher than hers, and his hat, right? She isn't wearing a hat. Her dress is wider than his robe. So to me, it's a rough balance left to right. Or you could make the case, though, actually, he is taller than her. So the largest mass would be him and then her. That's the only two masses. You really don't even see the wall. And then there's the obvious rhythm of the hands with the fingers, and, obviously the arms, heads, and all the detailing on the clothing. Here, the modeling is more soft and diffused. He did that a lot more, except on their faces and their hands. There, the detailing is sharp on the modeling, and the cement texture on the skin and on the details of their faces. But on their clothing, it's more soft and diffused modeling and texture. It's mostly stable. They're both standing upright, but he is leaning over towards her. So his, from his neck up, it's dynamic. And then obviously the top of everyone's head is curved, so it's dynamic. But their hands, mostly the arms, at least where they're touching, is pretty much right close to being in right angle. So it's a more stable than dynamic painting. For space, it's got overlapping, and for shortening, that's it. There's no other techniques for space. The colors, of course, almost all warm on both their clothing and their skin and their hair. And the lines are mostly thin outlines. Let's see, again, for proportion and scale, most of the paintings we're going to see until we get to the 20th century are going to be realistic. There's no distortion of the body parts, or these figures are in realistic scale to each other. Okay, am I forgetting anything? I think those are the main things. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, I already said it's roughly balanced. But if you see it as unbalanced to the left, I wouldn't dispute that. Now, this is not a must know, but anyone out there who may have, and I don't expect you to speak up unless you choose to, that's up to you. But I can tell you, I can relate to this painting on a personal level. This is called The Prodigal Son. A few of you may know. We're going to just do very briefly, and there's no formal analysis. We'll get right to the next two must knows and still end on time. But before we do get to the next must know, I just want to show you, this is right before he died. Rembrandt made it into his 60s. So not long before he died, he had a bit of an estranged relationship with at least one of his children. Well, this is a scene from the Bible. What the phrase prodigal son implies, this one scene where a well-to-do father in ancient Israel had two sons. He gave them both some money when they, became adults, and asked them to use it wisely. One son, the guy standing on the far left, stayed with his father, invested in his father's business, became successful, was going to inherit it, and did everything the way the father would have wanted. The other son blew the money, spent it. Oh, you have to write any of this, but I think it's a fascinating theme that I think a lot of people's families can relate to. And then disappeared for 20 years. His family, his father, his mother, that would be his mother, probably his uncle and his older brother, all thought he was dead. Then he reappears on his father's doorstep, homeless. Obviously, look at him. He can't even, keep his feet, shed, or sorry, clothed. No, sorry, shoed. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. He's lost one shoe and part of another, and he's living in rags. His hair is full of lice. This literally is a very detailed portrait of someone who's been homeless for years. But his father forgives him. He's just happy to see his long lost son, even if this guy might look like he's what the, oh, now, here comes my, competition. Now, who knows whether the younger son will get a chance to start again, but the father accepts. The point is of the story. He accepts the long lost or homeless son after 20 years with no word. Well, I have a brother who went through the exact same thing, my next youngest brother. He disappeared for over 20 years. And then he reappeared briefly by email with my youngest brother. They talked on the phone once or twice, and then he disappeared again for 5 or 6 years. And the last part of it update, within the last 2 years, I've been emailing him. He's in Dallas, Texas. He's living in a church, sponsored housing thing, and he's working to help immigrant families from across the border who need help that the church is sponsoring. And he's quit drugs and alcohol. It's pretty impressive. I haven't had a chance to go see him because of the pandemic and because there's all kinds of other issues, but I won't get angry that he didn't tell us we thought he was dead. We really did, because all of us, my dad and my mom, who since passed away. So if you've ever had, some of you must have someone in your family, even if it's not your immediate family, who just disappeared for a while or stopped communicating, or you got estranged from, that the point of this painting is to say you should be willing to forgive, because families have to do that, and eventually, hopefully, that will lead to reconciliation. Okay, I'm going to skip this for now. We'll see if I'll go back to it, depending on how long it takes, but we're definitely not going to skip this one, which is Woman Holding a Balance by Vermeer. Woman holding, ing, a balance, like the object, something balancing money or jewels. Woman Holding a Balance, the artist named Vermeer, and I know most of you have heard of him, but I will spell his last name, Vermeer, 1664. I'll bet most of you, if you've seen any Vermeers, or only one or two, are more familiar with the girl with the pearl earring. There was a movie about her. Scarlett Johansson played the actual woman in that painting. It's a fascinating movie and a true story. But he did a total of only 70 paintings that we know of. That's a very, very small output. Vermeer was less known by far, nowhere near, in other words, as famous or as successful as either Rembrandt or Hals. But he did everything from portraits to his forte. This is all part of the meaning now. Who was Vermeer? His strength as a painter was interior scenes, inside a room or a house, and also portraying photorealistic detail so sharp that there are people who think he must have had an early form of camera. Well, we know that's not true. Cameras weren't invented till the 1800s. But at this point, his detail is so sharp and realistic, you can use the phrase, his style, in terms of the composition when it came to simulated textures and modeling, was photorealistic, way ahead of his time. And then the third thing about him is an air of mystery about most of his paintings, deliberately not explaining to the viewer what's going on here. So let's see if any of you might have some theories. I'll give you the facts that might lead to some kind of educated guess. There's no right or wrong here, but we do know now what probably was going on. Okay, we see a woman who, well, what would you think is her condition? looking at her body. Anybody? Well, it isn't too far-fetched to figure out she's pregnant, quite pregnant, maybe, near the time to deliver her child, her baby. So she's pregnant, several months, you could just say, and she's weighing or measuring, you could say that way if you prefer, but that's what we mean by this. This balance is used to weigh or therefore measure, the wealth that she and her family have on the table. There are jewels, there are coins, there's gold. So she's weighing her material wealth, but there's a much deeper meaning to it. That wouldn't make this painting that unusual at all. Behind her is a scene of what happens according to Christian belief after you die. If you were good enough in life, you might go to heaven, right? So it's showing what happens to people after they die. It's called the Last Judgment, the painting on the wall. And now look at her face. Again, if there's anybody there, you don't have to speak up, but it just, some of you must have a thought or two. What kind of a state of mind do you think this woman's in? Here she is, several months pregnant, about to give birth. She obviously, with a fur-lined, jacket, she's coming from a well-to-do family. And there's a hint of something about death and life after death, the painting on the wall. And then we have her expression. Anybody want to just, what do you think she might be thinking about, or what mood or state of mind do you think she might be in? Nobody has a thought. Okay.
She seems relaxed.
That's interesting. I understand why you said that. No one's ever said that exactly that way. And I think there's more to it than that, but it does have, I can see why that would be certainly your first impression. Okay, well, if she were relaxed, then the painting on the wall would be, he placed the painting there, by the way. That is, he staged this scene, Vermeer, the artist. So he has a woman who is, he must have known her, right? Nearly ready to give birth, who comes from a wealthy background, but something having to do with death and or the next life is somehow pervading this scene, and therefore her thoughts. Okay, I know it's hard to guess, but I'm going to give you one more clue. What is that? Anybody guess? What does that look like on the side of her head? And it was one of my students in my very first class that figured this out. And then I did some research and he was right about what that actually symbolizes.
Is it blood?
Say again. Go ahead. There's no right or wrong. There were two people, so both of you.
It looks like a hand.
Yes, it's a hand. It's the shadow of a hand of someone who is not there with her. And the painting in the back gives us a hint. So here are the facts. Now you should be writing. She was married to a wealthy merchant marine man who owned some ships. I don't know if it's a fleet of ships, it doesn't matter, one ship or more. And he made his money from trade. Well, that's how many wealthy people in Holland did, of course, including the slave trade. But he wasn't actually, he was a trader. We know who this woman is and who her husband was. So he made his money from going to sea and bringing back goods. He died at sea in a storm, and she just found out that he died, and he will never come home to meet his unborn child. So now with that in mind, anybody want to guess what kind of thoughts, that's, in other words, his ghost. I mean, what else can you call it? Comforting her, saying he will be with her in spirit, if not in body, when she gives birth to their child. So what do you think her state of mind might be then?
Suicidal.
Well, excellent guess. Again, very original, creative. It could be, but probably because of her child, she's probably thinking, I need to be strong. It's probably anxiety or worry about the, emotional health of her unborn child, not his financial well-being, but his spiritual well-being, because of course he'll have no father, at least for quite a while. His birth father is not going to be there to help raise their child. She'll do it alone, of course, probably as servants, but nonetheless, that child will be missing his or her or their father.
It also kind of looks like she's like leaning into the hand, almost as if like she could
Yes,
feel it in a way.
no,
Like
That's one of the reasons I don't encourage. My tongue isn't working today. Thank you. You said it even better than anyone else has. I've had students kind of hint at that. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And I don't think that, let's get another close up, that's a minor point. She is leaning into his hand because she feels his presence. Oh, this is a spooky.
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
She's a spooky painting. I love it. By the way, it's at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. So you can go see it, and there's all kinds of research about it. So you get the idea why I say his paintings of interior scenes or rooms were full of mystery, but there are some where we know the facts and others we have to just guess. Oh, he's one of everyone's favorite painters. I think most people would agree with that. So let us now do the formal analysis. I already said the similar texture. We'll look at it even on the wood of the table, certainly on the jewels, on her hands and face, on her fur-lined cape, and even her dress, on the wall. And then here's a mirror, right? And a curtain, and then the painting, all of it, super sharp, similar texture and modeling. All the lines are thin. Oh, one more fact about the meaning. He did use a light box, it was called at the time. It's not a camera, but it would reflect with a mirror inside a wooden box any scene in front of it, within a certain degree, certain angles. And then he could project that onto a canvas or a wall. So that's why some people say he was cheating. But how is that cheating? I mean, it's not a camera or a print, or he's not tracing over, an existing photo. There were no photographs back then. So there are some art historians and even other painters who are into the abstracts, unrealistic styles of painting, who critique him or criticize him. I think that's silly. He was just more innovative and a little bit more patient in detailing the objects, the humans, figures, and the objects in all his paintings. Okay, now is it balanced? I would argue roughly, because even though the mirror is slightly higher than she is, the wall in general and the background between, this edge of this painting and her standing upright, it feels roughly balanced. I would say left to right. And it depends on how because that's empty space. Of course, you could make the case it's unbalanced toward the bottom. She's clearly the largest object. She's meant to be. And then the painting, because it's an important detail, and then the table in front of her. The rhythm is obvious with the arms and hands. You don't see the legs here, but of course the face and the objects on the table in the painting. For here, the modeling, though, is mostly super sharp and realistic, but it's slightly diffused on the shadows, both here on the wall. Maybe that's part of his ghost. I never thought of that entering the room, but probably not. But definitely it's diffused on the ghostly hand of her deceased husband. But everything else is super photorealistic. You can use that word on both the textures and the modeling. All the lines are thin. Let's see. For space, you have foreshortening, of course, overlapping, I would say diminishing size on the objects on the table. And there's definitely scientific perspective. We always use that. And there's no atmospheric perspective. The colors are cool on her jacket, warm on her, of course, her skin, the table, cool on the wall, warm on most of the figures in the painting, the curtain, and then this.
Do you think there's a vanishing point?
Yes, there would be. We know he did that. See, he wrote about his own paintings. Sometimes he didn't always write about the details of the meaning, but how he did them. He kept, I think, a journal. Anyway, there's a record of how he did. Yeah. I mean, not on a portrait, you wouldn't need that, of course, but in a scene, interior scenes, yes, there is a vanishing point somewhere beyond the wall, right? And then we have the, let's see, stable, mostly because she's being supported by him, but then the top of her headdress and the hand, those are dynamic. And of course, you could make the case her forearms, not her upper arms, are dynamic. But the table, the wall, the painting, the mirror, that's all stable, so it's mostly stable. Let's see, now we're forgetting anything. Oh yeah, proportions are all realistic here. Now this is not a minor masterpiece, one of his most famous paintings. Now this one's not a must know, but I just want you to, not this one, let's go beyond that one. This is called Girl Asleep, young woman, translated, someone probably in her late teens, who is, unmarried, obviously at this point. That's what that would imply, that title back then, from probably a middle-class family, Dutch family. And can you tell what's happened here? Let's see if anybody can guess. She has fallen asleep at a dinner table, probably over lunch, There was food being served and probably good Dutch beer here. Who knows? Maybe Heineken. It was around back then. And then there's this bunched up tablecloth and a chair askew and a door partly open. Can anybody guess what he's portraying here? It's meant to be satirical of a certain type of personality that isn't in the room. Anybody guess what just happened? And why is this woman falling asleep? And the title of the painting is Girl Asleep. What could have happened? Who could have been seated in this chair? I'm giving you a bit of a clue.
Maybe her lover or father.
Yeah, a suitor, some kind of suitor who wanted to marry her, and she was just bored to sleep, literally. Bored to tears, you know that phrase? She doesn't hide her total uninterest. It's comically sarcastic about male ego. That's what this is. He had a lot of daughters. I think he had 9 daughters and 4 sons. He had 13 children. His wife was Catholic, but he understood at least more than many other male painters in Europe, at least at that time, how women have to navigate through some of these, unpleasant scenes. So at least this guy got the message, got up, stomped out. You can almost hear the door ding, ding, ding. You know how wood does that when you slam it or shove it open. You can almost hear the reverberations and his footsteps heading out the door, his indignant, his wounded ego, right? I love this painting. Okay, let's do the last one because I do think it's important to include. This won't take very long. This one is self-portrait, just like it sounds. Last must know for today. Then we'll do the last 2 must knows, and we will talk about the exam. I will tell you, don't miss the class on Monday, how to review and how the test will be given for the midterm, which is on the 26th. Okay, yeah, so let's finish up with this one. This is self-portrait. Leister was the woman's name, the painter. Leyster, Leister, 1635. We're seeing a lot of Dutch Baroque painters now, but she was one of the few successful, independent of any man. Okay, that's an important detail. One of the few independent, successful female painters of her time, of the early 1600s, and she was Dutch. And this is a self-portrait of her enjoying her success and her lifestyle. And I love it because look at the way her self-confidence shows through, but that's her dressed as a man, whether or not there was any kind of, another lifestyle that she led that you might or might not have had to hide, or if she's just openly stating that, there's some debate over that. What we do know is that she didn't pretend to be anything other than a woman on her own who was a talented painter, especially a portrait painter, who then got a lot of clients because of her talent and, was able to overcome the obvious bias and sexism of the period against women artists of all kinds. And this is her as a different kind of artist, but dressed as a man here, a musician, right? Playing a violin, obviously. She's just enjoying the success in this moment or period of her life. And here again, you have the influence. She was friends with Frans Hals. That's one other fact about the meaning. She was influenced by him, but by no means was she copying him. You see the rather impressionistic lines here, right? On the top part of her dress and her sleeve, and even to some degree on her collar. If you look carefully, it's not very sharp and realistic the way her face is, and the easel and the rest of her outfit and her hand. So she emphasizes the parts of her anatomy that show her skill, her talent, her intelligence as realistic cemented textures and strong modeling, whereas the rest is rather diffused and even some would say a forerunner of a precursor, is the other word you can use, of Impressionism. So there's a lot more meaning to it than that, but she was very well accepted by, she got a lot of clients of patrons who would commission her to paint their portrait or family portraits. Formal analysis, and we'll end up right at about 4:15. And then I'll stick around for any other questions you might have. Okay, she's the largest object, of course, then the painting she's painting, right? The image on the easel, and then her palette, right? For space, you have foreshortening, of course, on her arm and shoulder, overlapping, and I guess you could call it diminishing size. The portrait of her is smaller in proportion to her than it would be if we were looking straight at it. But that's it. There's no vanishing point, no scientific perspective or atmospheric perspective here. The rhythm is obvious with her clothing, especially her collar, her face, her hand, and of course, well, these look like brushes. I assume they are different paint brushes. They create rhythm on her palette. And then the arms, hands, and legs, and of course, and face of the figure she's painting, the self-portrait. It is both stable and dynamic. Her arm is almost at a horizontal, almost at a right angle. And her upper body is pretty much straight up and down, but she is leaning back, relaxing and enjoying the moment in her chair. But the chair itself, what we can see of it, is stable. And then the easel is, and canvas is slightly tilted. So you could just say it's both, but maybe a little more dynamic than stable when you add up her head, of course, the top of her head and the palette. Then for colors, of course, warm on skin tones and most of the painting. Oh, hang on, it's saying it's not my battery this time, I can tell you. There we go. Let's wrap it up. So what we have is, the dynamic detailing, and let's see. Oh, thin outline. There's no bold outline here on all the objects. And we have, let's see, no altered proportions or an abnormal, I guess, scale between, her and the painting. It's about the size it would be if it was that far away. So there's no, altered type of proportion or scale here. Let's see, am I forgetting anything? Overlapping mass, color, texture, of course, as I already said, and the modeling is fairly strong. It's evenly lit, so there's not really any kind of chiaroscuro here. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah. All right, so here we go, 4:15. So let's stop the share, and I'll stick around for any questions you have about what we've just covered, which will be posted, of course, on my channel on YouTube before 8 p.m. On Friday. Of course, your papers are due 1 week from today, and I'm not going to do it again, but actually I will, because if you joined late, you might not have seen this. I think a couple people did. Do we have someone else still wanting to? Can't tell. No, we don't. Okay, again, I'll hold this up for just a moment. This is the format or the way to label your PDF files when you send your papers to me on Wednesday. If you want to be on time, they have to be submitted before midnight on Wednesday, the 21st. Your title art 1.2 research paper, underline, last name, period, first name, and then please make it a PDF. That's the only way I can open it. Sent to, if you want to make sure I receive it, markw@aol.com. And of course, a lot of people will do both, and that's okay. You can send to both. And I won't say, obviously, I would accept any paper sent to Outlook as well. That would be mwilson@santarosa.edu, because it is the official email address for the college. But there's often issues with it's hard to explain. It takes long to log things in for me that way. So if you want me to confirm I got your papers, ask me that in the top line of your email, above below where your file is attached, of course. And you're going to get finally the cover sheet sent to you over the weekend. It'll probably be Sunday when I send it out. And of course, for that, you need to combine the cover sheet so that I or the readers can grade your paper on the cover sheet. And that will be a good source for you as a checklist. I would even look at that cover sheet and say, did I cover all these aspects of the meaning of the requirements? And you already have the 5 requirements, of course, that I sent you. But the cover sheet gives you kind of a nice format as a checklist. I would consider. And lastly, I will answer any questions anyone has at any point up until, but not 24 hours or less before the paper's due. I may not be able to get back to you in time. If you want feedback on, say, a portion of your paper or any questions about it, you'll get in touch with me. I check my email on every day of the week, except I don't usually do it Saturday, but it's by Sunday night I check my weekend's emails. And of course, the paper's not due till Wednesday. So I'll send you an email reminding you of all these things before.
I have a question about the test.
Sure. You mean the midterm, the first midterm? Yes.
The midterm, right. Will there be illustrations of the paintings with accompanying questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, won't be questions. There'll be I'm going to go over this. You definitely want to be here for that. And of course, it'll be posted on YouTube, which is how to study for the test. And because of the fact the test is a Wednesday, I'm going to post that Monday evening. But you should be here for that, because that's when you can ask more
Okay.
detailed questions. But yeah, in general, it's 8 slides. I'll just give you a very brief quick, because we have more time, much more time to go over all this on Monday, which will be, actually, no, it's going to be Wednesday. What am I thinking? Yeah, I don't want to confuse you. I almost got myself confused. It's going to be Wednesday when we do the review for how the test is being given. So that will be posted later that week, and you have over the next 5 days to look at it. But you want to be there for the class, both Monday when I, finish up this topic and discuss how the papers should look and answer all your questions. That session may actually end early, but on Wednesday is going to be a full session where we discuss the upcoming test in detail at the beginning of 1 week from today. But that's also the day your papers are due. So there will be time to ask more questions, either by email or in class on Monday or Wednesday. But the nut, in a nutshell, it's 8 slides. 5 of them, you just identify the way they are in the syllabus. It's an open book test, of course, open note test. And then 3 that you analyze the way we've been doing in class, both the meaning and form elements. And I'll give you much more detail about that when we go over how to study for the test on the 21st. Okay. And any questions you ask by email, of course, I will respond as soon as within 24 hours after you send an email. All right. So now is a good time to ask questions about anything we covered. We've almost finished with Baroque, but there's still 2 more remaining must-knows, and they're not unimportant ones. And we'll get to those on Monday. And then we'll move on from there to non-Western art, of course, world art, which is a very interesting, important part of this semester for the next set of slides following the 21st after your papers are turned in. Okay, one more
So
time.
cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. I enjoyed your comments and some very original observations about that Vermeer painting. No one else has ever made, no other class. All right, you guys. One more time, anybody else? This is my unofficial, or it is my official office hour. So of course, I will check my email throughout the next 5 days, except maybe Saturday. So if you want me to get back to you before that weekend, you need to email me by Friday. Otherwise, Sunday, I'll get back to Sunday night. And I'll see you all on Monday. Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care. Okay.